Hi everybody, this is Arkady Frekhtman. I'm a New York City personal injury trial attorney, and today I'm doing a book review of this book called Trying Disc Injury Cases and Defeating the Degeneration Defense. And what is the degeneration defense? Well, degeneration is the normal, painless aging process. So you get into a crash and you say, well, now my back hurts. Didn't hurt yesterday, didn't hurt the day before yesterday. In fact, it didn't hurt in the last 10 years. But now that this truck really crashed into me and crushed the metal in my car, and you could see the truck is crushed in as well, and that didn't bode so well for my spine. Now my back starts hurting. What does the defense do? The trucking company, the defense lawyers hired by the big insurance company, the billion-dollar company, they say, this isn't from this crash. This is from the normal, painless aging process. It's all just a coincidence. It just happened that at the same time that this truck crashed into you and, totaled out your car, you just started to feel pain from the normal, painless aging process. So that's degeneration. And this book is written by Robert Simon, who I actually know. He's a really good lawyer out of San Diego and California, but he also does cases in other states like Texas. And I've actually recommended some of the viewers who have contacted me on this channel to him, and he's handling some of the cases. He's a really good trial lawyer. And it's also written by doctors, Peter Lowry and Orlando Michelli. So I started going through the book, and I thought it's really interesting. If we go through the table of contents, we could see what's included in the book. So it starts with part one of developing your case and anticipating what the defense will be. And see, that's really, really critical, because as a good trial lawyer, if you could anticipate and think ahead, just like when you play chess, right, what the defense will be, what the other side's move will be, then you can neutralize it, right? You could take care of it. And when they make their move, you're not really afraid because you already thought of it. So what he does is he talks about Spine 101, and he talks about the spine, how to diagnose spine injuries, building your spine case through science. He goes through common defense arguments, and then he talks about teaching an old defense attorney new tricks, telling your client's story, the human story, which I talk about a lot, and gathering evidence. That's part one. Part two, he talks about witnesses in deposition and trial, why less is always more. And he talks about treating doctors, how to take their depositions, defense experts, how to depose and cross-examine them, deposing defense doctors, depositions and using them at trial, defense biomechanical experts, defense billing experts, responding to defense doctors' deposition and cross-examination. And then finally, part three talks about the trial, and that includes pretrial motions, like motions in limine, venues, jury pools, and voir dire, how to find the right people for your case, opening statements, direct examination of your client, of the plaintiff, of the injury victim, and also cross-examination of defense witnesses, plus handling your client's cross-examination, preparing them, and then finally closing argument. And then he has some appendixes, like he has an outline for a plaintiff's direct examination. He has a deeper look into radiology, and he has a glossary of medical terms. So, I thought it was a really, really well-written book and very interesting. And it actually, taught me some things that I didn't know. And so I started going through it. I've read some of the chapters already, like the introduction and part one, where he talks about anticipating defenses and building your case. And he starts with the spine, and he talks about all the different parts of the spine, including things like pedicles, laminae, facet joints, transverse and spinous processes. So he goes into it in depth, and he has illustrations. So it's almost like a doctor explaining what everything is. And then he also goes through the vertebral column. He goes through all of the parts in the spine, not just the vertebrae and the discs, but also things like the anterior longitudinal ligament, the intra-articular ligament of the head of the rib and how that connects to the spine. So, and then he has more of a transverse section, a superior view, kind of like a bird's eye view where you look down and you could see like synovial cavities, intra-articular ligaments, you could see the discs. So very interesting. And he's got like different anatomical variations, vertebral bodies. He talks about the annulus fibrosus, the nucleus pulposus, which are parts of the disc, And the disc is like a jelly donut, right? So the nucleus pulposus, that's the kind of like the jelly inside, the center, the nucleus, which could then break out of all those walls and then leak out of the disc, causing the herniation, which is one of the common injuries. And he also talks about all the facet joints and all the different aspects of that, the joint capsules. So very specific, very, very good. And the spinal canals, the arteries, their distribution. And then he talks about injuries like spinal fractures, like fractures of cervical vertebrae, which is the neck. And he talks about different types, like there's a fracture of the tip, fracture of the base, fracture that extends into the body of the axis. There's fractures of the anterior arch, a hangman's fracture. So all these different types of injuries. And then he talks about the disc itself and all the parts of the disc. And then he also goes into herniations. And when he goes into herniations, he talks about different types of herniations, like a disc protrusion, for example, is the first type of herniation. And it's defined as a disc herniation in which the greatest dimension between the edges of the disc material presenting beyond the disc space is less than the distance between the edges of the base of that disc material that extends outside the disc space. So in other words, if it looks like you could push the herniated portion of the disc back into place with your finger, that's probably a disc protrusion. Like it protrudes a little, push it back in. But then you have a disc extrusion, and that's a second, and it's more severe. And that's, if the herniated portion of the disc is taller than the disc itself, and it looks like it's pushing it back in, would be really hard to do, like a complex maneuver. That's an extrusion. And then the third type, and the most severe, is a disc sequestration. And that's basically when you have a disc herniation that develops into separate globs of a disc fragment. And so basically, it's an island of disc material that is no longer connected to any disc. And these can become so severe that it's difficult to determine which disc the fragment came from in the first place. And then he talks about common locations of disc injury, like the neck, C5, C6, C6, C7. The T-spine, the thoracic, is less common because the ribs are there to protect. Lower back is also common. He talks about radiculopathy and radicular pain. And so he gives you like a whole, lesson in medicine. So I think it's a very, very good book. And then diagnosing spinal injuries, that chapter is written by the doctors, and they talk about x-rays and CAT scans and MRIs, and they actually explain, like, what is an MRI? How does it work? And they show you MRIs, and they show you how to read MRIs. And I think one of the important things that a trial lawyer has to be able to do is to be able to work with a doctor to distinguish between an MRI that shows degeneration, that some things are just slow and painless, and they are changes that happen over time, like spondylosis or, different types of medical findings that tend to suggest that this is something that's chronic, that happens over a long period of time, versus when you look at an image and you say, no, that's trauma, right? And if you're able to do that as a lawyer, that's very powerful, because then when the defense doctor gets up there and tries to say, no, that's from living your life. No, doctor, that's trauma. Look right there, right? And then you kind of call them out. So, and he gets into specifics like T1 sequences, T2 sequences, stir sequences. Those are all different sequences that you can use on MRIs. For example, he says here, there are MRI findings that suggest whether a disc injury is acute. And some of them are like a high intensity zone, HIZ, presence of a bright signal on a T2 weighted image, indicating a tear in the annulus fibrosus. Disc fragment signal intensity, if it's iso-intense or hyper-intense signal on a T2 weighted image, compared to chronic herniations, which are lower in T2 signal, secondary to desiccation. So he goes through that. Then he talks about how to build your case through science. And he goes through like MRI reports and herniations, bulges, radiculopathy. He has an entire map of dermatomes, how you have, for example, the C2 goes to a certain place, the C6 goes to like the thumb, right? Like every part of the spine in the neck and also in the lower back and in the thoracic as well will correspond to like a dermatome. So it'll run somewhere. Like for example, L5 will run to like the heel, C8 will run to the pinky. So he has that map. So he has a lot of good information for lawyers. I won't go through the whole book, because it's a big book. It's like a 400-page book, but I'll do maybe a little bit about common defense arguments so people know what the defense arguments are and how to respond to them. So some of the defense argument is the person is, oh, I'm sorry, one of them is the car is not hurt, so the person can't be, which is the property damage, right? Gaps in treatment, if you have gaps, like if you start treating, but then you stop treating for a year, they'll bring that up and they'll say, how come you don't go to the doctor? The cost of treatment, you know, basically they're saying that you can't be hurt if you haven't spent a lot of money on your treatment. The fear of a recommended procedure. So people fear the unknown. So some people fear doing surgery, and basically time, you know, time is, people understand time, and time is precious. You have time with your family, time for work, time for living your life, having fun. But what they're saying is that most people, you know, for example, most people would take their kid to the pediatrician with even a hint of a sniffle, and even their dogs if they are walking funny to the vet. But when it comes to themselves, they might put it off, right? People are busy. So he talks about that. He talks about unimpressive MRI findings, and then full out, like, your client is a liar, a cheater, and a fraud, right? That's what they're saying a lot of the times. And then he'll do, like, at trial, he'll do two roads. So he'll show, like, here's our version of what happened, and here's the defense road. And then you have to choose which road is more true than not true. And then he talks about damages witnesses, like coworkers, spouses, friends. And then, of course, attorney referred care, because if the attorney refers the injury victim to a doctor, they're going to say, well, it's all orchestrated by the attorney. So you have to know how to deal with that. And those are some of the common defense arguments. But so far, I really like it. I recommend it. I think it's a valuable resource. And, you know, there's a lot of books out there, but this one is particularly good because it really focuses on, you know, trying these disc injury cases. And, you know, most cases are disc injury cases. I mean, there are other types of cases. Sure, people have shoulder injuries, people have brain injuries, people have, you know, whatever. But like a lot of the cases, whether it's a trip and fall, whether it's a car crash, truck crash, motorcycle, they're going to involve disc injuries like herniated discs, bulging discs, or fractures to the spinal column. So it's really vital to understand that, to be able to explain it medically in court, to be confident with it, to know how to deal with the defenses. And this lawyer has actually won. He had a soft tissue light impact case with, I believe it was a disc herniation case, and he got like 16 million on it. So he knows how to do these cases. So it's a very, very valuable resource. So I highly recommend the book. Okay, everyone, please like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what questions you have. And we are here for you. Our goal is helping serious injury victims and families. All the best. Bye-bye.